Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to bring you the Healer M Plus rankings video for Battle for Azeroth. All right, 2 months out from the expansion. What are some of my thoughts on where all the healers stand, what they bring to the table, and what they have gained and lost going from Legion to BfA? All right. And before I start this off, I definitely want to make it clear that healing in Mythic Plus has gotten much closer together in BfA than it was in Legion. Right. Both legendaries, artifact abilities, all kinds of other components from Legion have really, as they've been gutted, as they've been removed, really kind of opened it up for more simple changes to each healer that have brought everyone a little bit closer together. If you're looking at which healers you want to bring early on in an expansion, my answer to you is going to be whoever understands these mechanics to the dungeons, whoever has actually paired and who is caught up and started learning on their spec early on, right? This is more meant to predict what will be the top dogs going into the expansion when people are looking to start pushing really hard in terms of Mythic Plus keys. Again, like I said, the gap between healers has gotten much closer going into Battle for Azeroth. That being said, starting off with number 6 is the Holy Priest. Holy Priest has gotten some nice tools, but really hasn't actually gotten enough to make it more highly ranked, really. Having powered fortitude is a nice benefit, and it's something that's unique and extremely powerful. But when you're sharing it with Discipline Priest, and Discipline Priest, as we'll go into a little bit later, getting everything that it has gotten and has received makes it very hard to make the argument specifically to bring a Holy Priest to the group, right? Still having some of the tools, for example, with like mind control, knockbacks, etc., are very niche and depend on the instance itself. It depends on the instance itself. Things like Mass Dispel depend on the instance itself about how valuable they can be, because some instances they could have no effect and no benefit to you at all, and others they could be more vital on. And after going through all the dungeons repeatedly on beta, there's some more niche effects to it, but Mass Dispel especially doesn't seem to be an overwhelmingly powerful tool. Purge does look to be quite powerful, but again, when Mass Dispel and Purge shared between Holy and Disc, you have to look at what else is there to be able to brought to the table here. And Holy Priest with the Apotheosis change makes it a little bit nicer. Being able to take a Benediction and Apotheosis is a little bit nicer and kind of smooths out your healing, but it really hasn't received quite enough for me to justify putting it at a higher rank at this point. Number 5 is going into it is Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman has gotten some nicer tools and has gotten some more convenience added into them that looks like it would have been taken away going into BfA. Specifically, I'm talking about the Echo of the Elements and Cloudburst Totem being on different talent rows now. So one of the things that made Resto Shaman a lot more palatable, in my opinion, in Legion was once you got Soul of the Farseer and taking both of those talents together and actually being able to have the benefit of both, right? So once you were able to have both, you were able to just have constant tidal wave stacks. You're able to have much more damage really when you're able to get the lava burst stacks just being cycling off cooldown. Being able to have the extra one can be quite nice, and especially having the flame shock buff allowing you to have additional chance to proc an instant lava burst really puts it in a nicer position. But the lack of survivability and external cooldown have put it still in that position that even though there aren't those nice tools, even though there's single target interrupt, there's an AoE stun, you're able to you are able to have a slow right off the bat. You have this great toolkit, this great Swiss Army knife. The external cooldown really does put it at such a higher level, higher requirement, and kind of supersedes a lot of those other benefits. Unfortunately, being able to actually just put some damage reduction onto the tank, let him round up a bunch of mobs, bring them back into it, goes a very long way on trash packs. Resto Shaman just seems kind of like on the cusp of being in that top group where everything's gotten a little bit closer together. It seems like it's going to be making quite a bit of progress and has gotten much better going at BfA, but it doesn't quite break up into the top 3, which I think are going to be much more highly represented. But number 4 is Mistweaver Monk. Mistweaver has gotten some great tools and additional utility going into it. Not only do they bring the physical damage reduction, the physical vulnerability debuff, much like all the other monks do, they're also bringing baseline AoE stuns, so they're going to be able to take Ring of Peace at the same time, making them quite great on specific affix weeks, kind of like Sanguine, for example, or just great at ad control on certain boss fights. So you do have those nice tools, and it's kind of a similar position that I think of as Resto Shaman, where you have a lot of nice side tools that you really see a lot of times melee are the ones bringing. Melee or just other DPS are bringing to the table that the healer can bring, which is really cool and interesting. But at the same time, if the melee can already bring it, if they can already fill in that slot, and you're not needing too much extra on top of that, then you're looking at, well, what can a healer bring that the melee cannot bring or the DPS cannot bring? And that's just going to be, again, the external cooldown. And where Cocoon, while it has received a considerable buff in terms of uptime and, of course, the absorption effect, when you're comparing absorption effects to the damage reduction, you're always looking to take the damage reductions. Damage reductions being quite a bit more powerful. And while the balancing act has gotten a little bit closer, you're having that constant going into the expansion where I know how much damage reduction we'd be able to get out of this. Having the higher uptime when you're going into larger pulls goes a really long way for making a smoother run. So I like where Mistweaver's at, and again, like Resto Shaman, I think it's really close to on the cusp of being a much more competitive healer. And if their damage starts shaping up where, you know, the Rising Mist, for example, will be able to make things easier to like pump out very big damage while healing, that can be an extraordinary benefit, much like we're going to be seeing out of Paladin the Disc Priest. So those are other areas where they can definitely go through. But at this point, I think that they're, again, kind of on the cusp of breaking into that top 3 slot. Of course, the number 1 through 3 here kind of represents what I think are going to be the upper echelon. You know, that they have the right tools in the right position to be able to be more competitive. And at number 3, I would say it's going to be Resto Druid. Resto Druid has really kind of come down to earth from Legion in a number of different areas, from survivability to healing throughput and to the damage they're able to actually dish out. By the sounds of that, it sounds like they're gutted, but that is not at all the case. Survivability, of course, when they're the bear form, of course, for non-guardian druid, so like Resto Druid, went from 40% additional stamina to 15% additional stamina. You know, that is quite a bit of survivability nerf. Losing out on legendaries just in general has been kind of a nerf as well, because a lot of times you're able to say, well, no matter what affinity that I'm in, I'm able to dish out huge damage based up, because if I have, you know, Fury of Nature, Leading the Child, Chatoyant Signet, to name a couple of them, you're able to actually pump out big damage no matter what affinity that you are in, or even if you need to go Guardian affinity for one dungeon to survive, you still have tools, you still have options to dish it out. We'll see how the tuning wraps up, but if it's anything like it looks like it's been on beta so far, if you're committing to, say, Guardian Affinity, you're sacrificing a lot in terms of damage. If you're going into Feral Affinity, then you might be sacrificing some in terms of survivability. So it might be making a greater divide between those talents. And, well, that's not the end of the world for them, and they're still a very competitive healer. That is a significant change that is worth noting, right? Having to choose between Germination and Flourish, even though Flourish has gotten Ganir rolled into it, you know, still having to choose between both talents when previously they were on the exact same row can be a bit of a hurt. Well, your compensation for that is getting Stonebark competing with 2 talents that are mainly based for rating, which makes your external cooldown even better, which will go a very far away in just terms of uptime and the healing you're able to put into the tank. But it doesn't quite make up for losing out on Germination and Flourish at the same time. So Druid wraps up around number 3. And now at number 2, number 1 are extremely close, so I know there's going to be some disagreement on this one, but Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin, of course, you know, just right there next to side by side with Resto Druid and Legion as just the king and queen of M+ healers. I'd say it's at the number 2 spot from what we've seen so far. Not having too many throughput changes while still having access to Beacon of Virtue and still being extremely powerful. You're getting an additional tool with Avenging Crusader, which was formerly a PvP talent, now is a PvE, replacing your wings and allowing your judgments and your Crusader strikes to heal a couple additional targets. You know, having such high tuning that we're seeing right now on beta with Avenging Crusader makes it so that whenever damage goes out, you stop dealing damage, you pop Avenging Crusader, which is on the GCD, and then you continue dealing damage, and you just heal everybody up through that. Goes a very long way in terms of making, you know, your dungeon go much faster and not really having to shapeshift or spend extra globals besides, you know, the initial one to be able to actually pump out damage. You're not really deviating from your original purpose, right? That goes a very far way. Some considerable nerfs, missing out on the 15% additional HP that Legion gave them, some of like the judgment damage reduction, for example, that they had, and Devotion Aura being nerfed a little bit are quite significant. But when you're bringing Blessing Protection, Blessing of Sacrifice, you're still having Devotion Aura Mastery, which is exceptional utility for your entire party to be able to deal with big damage mechanics. You have all these tools at your disposal to continue to be able to deal with boss fights in large ease. And always having your own immunity is definitely going to go much further when you're going into specific raid bosses, or sorry, Mythic Plus bosses, as the scaling continues to grow. So number 2 slot, but very, very close to the top. Finally, number 1 is Disc Priest. Disc Priest has gotten some crazy considerable tools going into the new expansion here. And much like you're seeing, they're still able to have Purge and Mass Dispel, which are very important to go into, or sorry, Purge is extremely important to go into the new expansion. Mass Dispel is a little bit more situational. But so many self buffs that these mobs have goes a very long way in terms of making a competitive healer. And of course, you're going to be able to have absorbs with Powered Shield on no cooldown. And while the baseline Powered Shield is not very powerful, the fact that it scales with your mastery goes an extremely long way in adding extra utility to the group. So mastery may not necessarily be the first stat that you want to stack going into just competitive Mythic Plus, because it's not going to contribute to your damage at all. But the fact that it does increase your absorption effects will be significant when you start getting into boss fights that are going to require more defensive capabilities, or it will just add more benefits if you're better at preempting the damage, right? When you're able to have Rapture on a 1.5-minute cooldown, it's very simple to be able to apply Atonement to everybody and then just Rapture, shield everybody, and you're able to preempt tons and tons of damage onto the group and then get right back into DPSing, right? The catch to this is that while you are applying those atonements, you can be losing out on some of the damage from the Sins of the Many talent, which was added, giving you 12% additional damage, but is reduced by 1% per atonement that you put out. But if that does play out the way that it looks to be so far, if you're able to do a really good job of applying as few atonements as possible, or as few as necessary to keep people alive, then you're spending the entire dungeon with a 10-11% damage increase and being able to absolutely obliterate mobs and contributing so heavily to extra damage. Not only to mention the extra damage you're bringing, but also to barrier, pain suppression, making for excellent externals or group-wide cooldowns, and Powered Fortitude being such a unique mechanic that is not being able to be replaced by other healers, right? Not be able to be replaced by other healers, and not be able to be replaced by any other DPSers. Assuming we're going to bring we're not bringing Shadow Priest M+. So those are really the big points, is like, while there are great utility tools for healers in like Resto Shaman and Mistweaver Monk in terms of stuns, kicks, slows, because those tools are interchangeable with a lot of melee and just a lot of DPS in general, it doesn't make them unique enough to be able to be more valuable to the group. Having hard damage reduction in Paladin and Druid and in Disc Priest goes such a long way, because nobody else can bring those to the table except for you and the tank. Because healers are able to kind of dip into what melee brings or what DPSers bring, but they're not able to do the reverse in terms of external cooldowns, you really are looking at which healer is bringing the externals that are most beneficial to the tank so they can make more aggressive pulls, and then bringing DPSers to be able to have the AoE stuns, slows, grips, what have you, to be able to manage those ads after the fact here. And that really has been what the Mythic Plus meta has been. If that shifts in the future, then you'll definitely start seeing some changes from there. But that is the primary root of why I have those rankings the way I do. So let me know what you guys think, if you have any thoughts, or where you would otherwise rank the healers and why. Until next time, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to check out the live stream, link in the description below, while we'll be knocking out lots of Mythic Plus dungeons on beta. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll catch y'all next time.